This video is a quick review of percent basics. And y'all, it doesn't matter which math class I'm teaching. It could be basic math skills all the way up through calculus. When students see a percent built into a problem, they're like, nope, nope, skip, move on, next one. Y'all, you cannot avoid percents, not in real life and not in this class. Even if you could avoid it in your day-to-day life somehow, you can't avoid it in this class because every single unit we cover will have percents in it. You'll see percents when we do statistics. You'll see percents when we talk about personal finance, when we talk about probability. You're gonna see percent. So what is a percent? How do we use it? Okay, well, a percent is a fractional amount whose denominator is 100. The word percent literally means percente, per hundred. So for example, if you see 3%, that percent symbol is telling us that we really have 3 out of 100. That percent symbol is a shorthand for this fractional amount, 3 out of 100. So if we read, I don't know, 3% of adults like anchovies on their pizza, that means if I got a group of 100 adults, 3 adults out of those 100 adults would like anchovies. 3 out of 100. Now, I just converted that percent into a fraction, but we could also make that a decimal. Remember, a fraction can be converted to a decimal by doing numerator divided by denominator. So 3 divided by 100 is 0.03. Well, that 3 is in the hundredths place. So we literally read this decimal as 3 hundredths. And you need to be comfortable translating a percent either into its fraction form or into its decimal form, because we'll never calculate with a percent. You'll be given a percent, you have to interpret it, but your calculations that you do will actually be changing that percent from a fraction to a fraction or to a decimal. And we'll practice converting between percent form, fraction form, and decimal form in this video in just a minute. Another important thing to remember about percent is that a percent always references something. You never have a percent just floating around in space. You'll never just see 3%. You'd be like, 3% of what? You're always taking a percent of something. You're going to take a percent of $1, a percent of a group of students, a percent of Americans, a percent of what? So whenever you see a percent, slow your brain down and be like, a percent of what? And don't move on until you figure out what that what is. What are we taking a percent of? Okay, and then that amount that we're taking a percent of is given a special name. It's called the reference value. So when you see 3% of, and you're like, what? 3% of what? That's your reference value. What are we referring to? 3% of $1? Then the dollar is my reference value. 3% of all American adults? All American adults would be my reference value. So you'll see that coming up in 3A. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about why percents. Why do we see percents everywhere? What's so special about them? Well, percents are useful for making comparisons. Why? Because all percents are out of 100. So let's look at an example here. Let's consider these two quiz scores. Okay, so quiz 1, Mark scored 17 points out of 20 points. Not bad. And then on quiz 2, Mark scored 21 points out of 25 points. Okay, which score was higher? How do you know? Well, right now, these quizzes are kind of hard to compare because quiz 1 was out of 20 points and quiz 2 was out of 25 points. The denominators are different. Now, I could do some work to get common denominators here, and then they'd be easier to compare, right? Well, that's exactly what happens when we convert these fractions into percents. We give them a common denominator of 100, and then they're really easy to compare. So if I get 17 points out of 20, so 17 out of 20, that's 17 divided by 20 to convert that fraction into a decimal. And when I do that, I get the decimal amount 0.85. That's 85 hundredths. 85 hundredths. 85 out of 100. That's 85%. Okay, so Mark made an 85% on quiz 1. And let's do that same thing to quiz 2. If I got 21 points out of 25, out of 25, if I divide numerator by denominator, that's going to give me 0.84. That's read as 84 hundredths, 84 out of 100. That's 84%. So yeah, now it's easy to see that quiz 1 was the higher quiz score because we ended up comparing both quizzes out of 100 points. 85 out of 100 points is definitely higher than 84 out of 100 points. That's the beauty of percents. All percents have a denominator of 100, so it makes them easy to compare. Okay, so now that we know a percent is a fraction out of 100, let's look at some benchmark percents. Those are percents that we can use as like a threshold. They're easy to think about. So they help us compare like more complicated percents to something we're more comfortable with or that we can visualize. So let's look at some examples here of some benchmark percents. Let's say, for example, we see this phrase, 50% of children like broccoli. 50% of children like broccoli. What does that mean? What does 50% of children mean? Well, that means if we got a group of 100 children, then 50 of those 100 children will like broccoli. 50 out of 100. Well, that fraction reduces, right? What's 50 out of 100? It's just 1 out of 2. That's half. That means for any group I get, any size group, it could be 20 children, 100 children, 500 children. If 50% of them, those children like broccoli, then half of those children are going to like broccoli. So 50% is another way of saying half. So I can use this fact if I get a percent, like what if I was told 48.7% of children liked broccoli? Well, 48.7% seems a lot more intimidating, right? But if I know that that's like really close to 50%, I know my answer should come out to be about half the children. That's why 50% is a benchmark percent. It's easy to think about half. Our brains can visualize that. So we can use that 50% as a benchmark to help compare other percents that are close to 50%. Same thing goes with 25%. So let's look at this next example. If we were told 25% of men have beards, what does that mean? Well, the literal translation is in a group of 100 men, 25 out of those 100 men would have beards, right? So that's 25 out of 100. If I reduce that fraction, that's 1 out of 4, right? There's 4 quarters in a dollar. 25 cents compared to 100 cents in a dollar, that'd be 1 out of the 4 quarters. So that's a benchmark percent. 25% means a fourth, right? So it's a half of a half. That can help us figure out, visualize, use some number sense, kind of figure out an answer. Like for example, if I was told, 26.3% of men have beards. Well, it can be really easy to do a typo on my calculator or something with 26.3%, right? But if I know that that's really close to 25%, I know my final answer should be about a fourth of the men or a half of a half, right? So that 25% is called a benchmark percent. It's going to help us use some number sense to reason through whether our final answer to something like 26.3% of men would be reasonable. Now, one other thing we need to talk about is percents that are greater than 100. Sometimes it's going to make sense to have percents that are greater than 100, and sometimes it won't. And that just depends on the reference value, right? Like, what is that percent referencing? So let's look at some examples. So let's think about this. Can Mark eat 120% of a pizza? What is that 120% referring to? Well, it's referring to a pizza, right? What would happen if Mark ate the whole pizza? How much of that pizza did he eat? 100%. So if he eats the whole pizza, he eats 100% of the pizza. So can he eat more than the whole pizza? No, right? He can't eat 120% of the pizza. He eats 100% of it and it's gone. So in this context, when that 120% is referring to a pizza, you can't eat more than 100% of the pizza because then it's gone. So can he eat more than 100%? Can he eat 120% of a pizza? No, at most he can eat 100%. So in this context, percents bigger than 100, don't make sense for this scenario. And it all depends, again, what is that percent referring to? So let's try another one. What about this one? Can Mark meet 120% of his savings goal? 120% of his savings goal. Does that make sense? Well, what would it mean if he met 100% of his savings goal? Well, that's kind of abstract. Let's say his goal was to save, I don't know, $100 a month. What would it mean if he met 100% of that savings goal? Well, that would mean he saved $100 a month, right? So can he save 120% of that goal? Again, that goal is still $100 a month, right? Can he, what would that mean to be 120% of that goal? He can do that, right? Yeah, it just means he saved more than $100, right? He exceeded his goal. That's okay. So in this context, percents bigger than 100% makes sense. And we're going to see percents bigger than 100%. We're going to talk about inflation rates in this class. And that can definitely be bigger than 100%, unfortunately, right? So always with percents, when you read a percent in a problem, slow yourself down and say, what am I taking a percent of? Because whatever you're referencing is going to have a huge impact on how you interpret that percent and what your possible answers could be. Okay, so we've talked about some of these like big picture ideas with percents. Let's do some of the nitty gritty calculations. So grab a calculator. Here we go. It'll be your best friend. Let's talk about how to convert between percents and decimals and fractions. Now, every calculator is different, and we highly recommend you embrace your calculator. So if you need some help, come to office hours or visit our embedded tutor or an instructional associates. You can share your screen and we can help you learn your specific calculator. But there are some basic ideas that'll work regardless of your calculator. So our first basic idea, we've already talked about a little bit, is how to change a number in percent form into decimal. That's the easy one, right? Because we know percent is a number out of 100. So 21%, for example, would be 21 out of 100. And no matter what calculator you have a division key, right? So you just do numerator divided by denominator. So I would do 21 divided by 100. And when I enter that in my calculator, that's going to give me 21 hundredths. Now, it's the fraction key that's different on all the calculators. So you should have a fraction key somewhere on your calculator where all you have to do is take that decimal form, the 0.21, you press your fraction button key somewhere on your calculator, and that'll change you into the fraction 21 hundredths. Now, this fraction we knew, right? Like 21% literally means 21 out of 100, and that doesn't reduce, but you'll always want to simplify your fractions for MyMathLab purposes. On a written homework assignment or a test, you can leave it 21 out of 100 and we'd be fine. But if you're asked to simplify a fraction on MyMathLab, you can use your calculator to do that. So there's a couple more problems here that I want you to try. So go ahead and pause your video and try these, and then unpause and see how you did. Okay, check yourself. You can pause if you need to. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about how to get the fraction form because that's so specific to your calculator. But I do want to talk a lot about, or spend some time talking about how to go from percent to decimal. Okay, so let's look at C and D right now. Okay, C and D, we were given decimals there. So for C, I was given 0.8, and I was asked to convert that to the form that has a percent. Now, you probably learned some rules in your previous math class about moving the decimal point, right? And you could convert between decimals and percents doing that. So let's talk about that a little bit. Okay, so here's my decimal point. I want to move the decimal to change it to a percent. Right now, there is not a percent symbol written in 0.8, right? So if I want to move my decimal, I don't think about left or right because that can confuse me. I think about moving it towards where that percent sign is going to go, right? I'm going to write the percent at the end of the number, so I'm going to move the decimal towards where that percent sign will go. And since a percent is out of 100, I'm going to relocate that decimal point 2 place values. So 1 place value, that puts it behind the 8. A second place value will put it over here, and there'll be a missing place value that I need to fill in. That's how I got 80%. So let's see that again with D. With D, I had 0.05. Again, I want to change that to a percent. I'm going to locate my decimal. I'm going to move that decimal towards where the percent sign is going to go, right? And I'm going to relocate it 1, 2 place values. That's how I got 5%. The decimal relocates right after that 5. So let's try it the opposite direction. Let's look at E and F now. Okay, so on E, I was given the percent form, 1.3%, and I'm being asked to translate it to a decimal format. So what I do in this one, again, instead of thinking left and right, I locate that decimal. It's written for me in this number. And I think about this. I think about wanting to get rid of that percent symbol. So I'm going to move my decimal away from the percent symbol. So I'm going to relocate it to the left, 2 place values again. So that's 1 place value, 2 place values, and I'll fill in that missing place value with a 0. That's how I got decimal 0.13%. And I like to put a 0 in front of the decimal. That's just my personal preference. So again, with 109%, converting that to a decimal, this is what I did. I located my decimal point. Well, it's not written in this one, right? So it's understood to be at the end of the number after that 9. So I located it. And then I said, okay, I want to get rid of that percent symbol. So I'm going to move the decimal away from the percent symbol to place values. That put it between the 1 and the 0. So I had 1.09%. Okay, if you need more help with that, come see us in office hours or use one of your tutoring resources. If you're having trouble with your fraction button, come see us in office hours, because we are going to hit the ground running with Section 3A, and you're going to need to know all about all these different percent forms. You'll also have to have a pretty good understanding of, like, what is a percent? A number out of 100. What is the percent referencing? That's your reference value. You're going to need to know all this when we hit the ground running on Section 3A. And to make sure you're feeling comfortable, there's a short homework assignment on MyMathLab just about percent basics. So this idea of converting between the forms, between percent form, decimal form, and fraction form. So make sure you do that MyMathLab assignment. And again, if you struggle, reach out on your tutoring resources page, reach out and get help, okay?